You're tuned in to Reimagine 2021, version 11, the #1 virtual crypto and blockchain conference. Our panel of guest speakers try to define something difficult, the metaverse. What is it really?
A lot of talk about the metaverse. What does the metaverse mean to you, and will any one entity really own it?
So in reverse order, absolutely not. The idea of a centrally controlled organization deeming that they are the metaverse is antithetical to what the metaverse actually is. It's comical, actually. The idea that Facebook, now Meta, or Microsoft saying we are the metaverse is akin to when Bill Gates was on TV in the early 90s saying the internet is not important, it's the Microsoft intranet. Let us control. No, we don't want one centralized authority. We want the broad-based, liberating, democratizing asset. What the internet did by breaking the monopoly of information from theology or from church and government into the world of free and open information exchange. I think crypto is doing the same thing in the world of value. So this idea that the metaverse is a place, like some Ready Player One, that will be part of it. Immersive experiences will certainly be part of the metaverse. But I like the description the other day, and I wish I could give credit, but I can't remember who I'm stealing it from. Picasso said, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal." So I'll just steal it from them and attribute later. But he said that it's not so much a place or a thing as a moment in time where the physical world and the virtual world start to intersect. And I think that's exactly right. It's when we realize that we're spending as much time in the virtual parts of our lives as in the physical parts of our lives. And the metaverse is that integration of all of the things relating to the digital world and the physical world. And we went through the Industrial Revolution and we made our physical power better, faster, stronger through machines. Now we're going through the cognitive revolution where we're taking our brain power and making it better, faster, stronger through, again, machines. And that digitization of assets and ownership and tools and processes is the metaverse, as opposed to a place where we go to hang out.
So when I left investment banking, I left JP Morgan in 2013. I spent a couple of years looking at augmented reality and VR. It is personally fascinating for me to think about the ability to visualize something that isn't physically present. I think it can create powerful emotions in people and can be real to people. And as you look at the technology, and VR and AR have sort of gone through cycles, right? And I think it's super cool to have a open source software protocol that enables a digital goods economy meshed with AR or VR as the technology around computer vision's getting better. I see all of this nicely coinciding. In terms of what does the metaverse mean? I think there have been many books and content written about what that could mean, what the metaverse could mean. I think if you overlay some of the advances that we're seeing in computer vision and VR technology with the fact that you can match it with an open source protocol that enables creators and innovators to build digital scarcity, proof of provenance, and business logic, now you start to see a parallel universe that is not just it's not just a rendering you can actually do things. You can actually own digital property. You're now then thinking about an ecosystem. So something like Axie Infinity might be just considered a game, but it is actually fundamentally what an economy with no friction should do. An exchange of capital versus time, so resources. It is almost a perfect ecosystem where the suppliers and demand of a certain resource is able to meet a fair market clearing level, and that's super exciting.
The metaverse, and I think most people in this space will agree with this, the metaverse is like one unified digital world where everything's kind of connected, everyone has their identity, their profile, their currencies that they use, maybe it's multiple currencies they use, but I think the key is it's one singular world and it's all connected. And the issue right now is we have many metaverses that are not connected. And the problem is a lot of them are decentralized, but it's not in their best interest to connect to these other metaverses because their business model is surrounded by people using their world. So I think in that regard, a lot of innovation needs to happen in the metaverse space that's decentralized, not centralized, so that people can actually connect to these worlds and actually use their identities, their NFTs, like whatever they're going to be collecting, their currencies in the digital realm in multiple worlds. And I think that's the danger with like companies like Facebook and all these hyper centralized companies coming in, because there's zero chance you're going to be able to use that metaverse without them owning your data, without them like owning the entire ecosystem and deciding who comes in and plays. And that's like not an open, like unified world. So I think like, just like we're gonna have cross-chain interoperability in a couple of years, and it's gonna be less about like, oh, what chain are you on, and more like what ecosystem are you a part of, and like different projects collaborating to like share the wealth, share the value, and connect to one another. I think the same thing is gonna happen to like the metaverse space.
Yeah, when I hear the term metaverse, we have Facebook recently that announced their name change to Meta, and they're going all in on this idea of having these worlds that people can interact with. I don't think the metaverse is something that can be centralized. I think the metaverse needs to be something that's completely decentralized. In my mind, you're going to have these separate worlds that exist, and you're going to have different governance structures, for example, for each of those different worlds, different currencies maybe, different ways of interacting from one to the next. And it's likely not just sort of one blockchain or one company take all. It's hopefully a combination of all of these different companies and different blockchains and underlying infrastructures and assets all coming together and being able to be interoperable, creating a place where we can all work and play and share and grow. And it's really important that there's an interoperability aspect that's included in this. As said, there's going to be a lot of different blockchains and networks that I think are going to be successful based on what their differentiations are. And so ensuring that they can all talk to each other is incredibly important.
For me, the metaverse extends way back when I think Second Life was really, I guess, the closest you could get to a metaverse. The first time I found out about it, I think I was just pretty young. I was a teenager probably, and I was wondering, well, how do people make money in this? It doesn't make sense to me, actually. And I think it stemmed from maybe like my interest in gaming. But what I found out is if people really feel like they're part of a community, they feel like they have a vested interest in that world, then you can really have any type of value exist in that ecosystem. And especially if you have a strong and populous community, then that value can compound itself within that environment. So that's kind of the same reference that I gave with the walled garden scenario, where back in Web 2 technology, you just had Second Life, but you couldn't really transfer the Second Life assets to anything else, or you didn't really mean anything beyond those walls. And of course, that was a very unique use case because they had such a strong community behind it who was willing to spend money. And I think I remember early articles were like, well, someone spent X amount of money on a Second Life house. Why is someone doing that when they can just do that with their real world house? And again, it's because it has meaning to them. So with the metaverse, now you have this open format that basically takes that and shoots it up to a totally new level. I think the main concern I have now is a lot of people are getting into it, like with a lot, like NFTs, DeFi, even just like early cryptos back in like the early 2010s, kind of right when Bitcoin was coming out. And so I think there's going to be poor implementations. That's just the natural progression of open system. But there's also going to be really strong implementations. So I think from maybe the last 2 or 3 years, because I think metaverses have been technically around for that long, and perhaps even the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to have a lot of new interest come into play. But of course, only the strong projects could survive. So that's what really is what I care about. Right now, it's really too early to say, and I don't know. For metaverses, it's kind of hard for me to really understand which ones are kind of the strong projects. And maybe one of the ones will shine through soon, and that'll give me a little bit of a stronger reference point to lean on.
How do we know we're in the metaverse?
Okay, this is actually a very interesting question. So I don't know if you've read Snow Crash, Neil Stephenson. He coined the term metaverse, like, I want to say early 90s. Very interestingly, it's actually a critique on capitalism. And so, like, I know that Mark Zuckerberg and Meta and Facebook and Meta, whatever you want to call it now, I've almost taken that literally. I personally think that's the wrong way to go. A critique, you don't want to take a critique on capitalism and make it real. And so there's certain things that we're doing, like I myself in facilitating the class at University of Washington with humanities department to kind of put humanities, STEM, like business students kind of together and figure out like governance of what may be a metaverse from the humanist perspective and like interactivity. Because like Zuckerberg's vision of metaverse is like goggles and like, you know, or glasses and that kind of stuff. And, you know, I don't think everyone will want to interact like in Ready Player One necessarily. You know, like I think people should be able to be like obtrusive, unobtrusive, different ways of interacting with what would be the physical internet, which is enabled by NFTs, you know, by bringing physical objects like into this virtual world. But you shouldn't have to exist in this virtual world to interact with those NFTs, if that makes sense.
So yeah, it's basically like virtual world, some other galaxy I can create from scratch and do some cool stuff there. It's kind of new world.
The metaverse to me is the future. It's what the young generation wants. I think something that comes to mind when I think about the metaverse is just the exchange of digital goods. With us, I mean, I grew up playing games. I grew up buying digital goods that I would not receive in person. And so it was such a fundamentally easy concept to understand and grasp for me that when I talk to artists who aren't able to understand this entire concept of digital goods being transacted, it's hard for me to explain it to them because it's like, why wouldn't you buy a skin in Fortnite, for example? I think that a lot of different brands, a lot of different companies are taking different approaches to what metaverses mean. There are so many different lands being developed, you know, Sandbox. I recently heard of even a real estate developer for virtual worlds. And so they're buying lands of Sandbox, Decentralization, and then developing it as how you would in a real estate developer in real life, and moving that onto different worlds and having people then buy them. So I think that's something really interesting that's happening too. But ultimately, I think the metaverse has kind of become a catch-all phrase for anything that's related to Web3, anything that's related to something that the older generation doesn't quite understand yet. I don't feel like there's a true or right definition. I think that there are many different ways to approach what that digital world looks like, whether it means with the use of VR in the future or with virtual worlds or with virtual goods. Either way, I think that what is great about it is that it's a catchy term and it attracts a lot of attention and it gets people's attention like no other word can.
I think there's probably a little bit overhyping in terms of the short term of how much time we'll all collectively spend in the metaverse and with our avatars. Yeah. But I think over the long run, it's kind of where all roads meet, where decentralized finance, NFTs, and gaming come together. And you could see people like buying property and real estate, and it's already happening. Yeah. And so I'm actually very bullish on these, you know, in general, but I do think it'll be one of those growth cycles that has a lot of hype and speculation, and then at some point when people kind of forget about it, it'll skyrocket again.
kind of like AR, VR, that's been around a long time.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure it out. I think, Google came out with that glass thing and thought that was cool, but I guess that didn't last. So so I like that, the convergence of all three technologies, you think.
And all roads in NFT land meet are in the metaverse eventually.
I think it depends on how you define metaverse. And I think the concept or definition of metaverse can be pretty broad. And my definition of metaverse is like anything that you as a human being would recognize as like kind of like a separate world. But does it have to be VR? Doesn't have to be it's like a whole lot of unique platform. It's actually interesting. I was talking to some of the punks holder recently, and I was talking about the metaverse, and he actually thinks like owning his punks and then kind of talking to his fellow punks, and then talking on Twitter, actually that already feels like a game, and that already feels like a metaverse to him. So it really depends on how you define this metaverse. But I do think we will see these kind of evolve and eventually get to the ultimate metaverse that we're envisioning. I think we're kind of seeing various versions right now, either on Twitter, on these games like Fortnite. Then I think there are more platforms like Decentralization, Sandbox. Many of these are trying to build this metaverse. Nothing quite there yet, but I think we're seeing a lot of the early phases of different versions of the metaverse right now.